Okay, a little over 50 years ago. Time flies. A little over 50 years ago. In studying the Chumash, the first chapter of the Chumash, I got hung up, very enthralled with differentiation, the Hevdel, to separate out the day from the night. They use the word the Hevdel in the first, about the creation of light, and about the Mayim on top and so on. Okay, I'm not concerned with to explain the Bria and the creation story as most people understand it, and as it's come down, as a story about the things that we didn't make. Did not make. These things that are in the story are not made by the human being, including the human being. It's not made by the human being, but the human being can use all the things that are made, but not by the human being. Okay, so I got enthralled with this idea of Hevdel. And what hit me at the time was differentiation. Differentiation is a property of thinking. You cannot think without differentiation. In Greeks, it was the same in the other. Plato discusses it, all the philosophers discuss it. You can't think without differentiation. Differentiation requires two. You can't think one. If you have one, you cannot think. I even used it as extended to the idea when I talked about non-Euclidean geometry. Before 1830, geometry meant Euclid. After the word geometry, space
really
meant Euclid because that was the only geometry.
That's called plane geometry.
Right.
Yeah.
After Lobachevsky and Riemann, 1830, 1840, when you said the word geometry, at a certain point, you had to say, what am I talking about? I'm talking about Riemannian non-Euclidean geometry. Has something to do with the parallel postulate, blah, 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 whatever it is. And in discussions about geometry, you can go to the library and see you can turn it off, David. Press the, so you could see the changes in the way we talked about geometry. So okay. So coming back, so the basic point was, here we have differentiation, and I got this crazy idea at the time that maybe embedded in the creation story concerned with the things that we didn't do is another story or another piece inside the text that has to do not with the things that we didn't make as a creation story, but with how Moshe and the period of his time thought about the things. I got this crazy idea that there was inside of the big story another story. And the other story, the content of was it differentiation. Then I said light. Light means existence because you can't see in the dark. You have to see. Like when a child leaves, when you take the light out, we take it as a nothing, but that's a big crisis for a child, as you know. The child has to learn that nothing changes, so we give him a doll. We allow the child to sleep with something that keeps the room in balance with all of its components, even though it's in the dark. So I said, oh, well, okay, differentiation. Day 2. Day 1, existence. There has to be something that exists. That is, I call it a thing. There has to be something that is we're going to talk about. So we have a category, existence. There's no thinking without existence. Something has to be with the subject of what we're talking about.
When you say existence, you mean creation of thing?
Now I'm not talking about creation. I'm just saying categories. I'm now depicting...
Well, if there's nothing there, you can't categorize it.
Right. So there's something there. That's what I mean. We're talking about categories of thinking, not with respect to a creator. That's in the first story. In the first story, yes, things were made by HaKadosh Baruch Hu as part of that story. So now we're switching, and I'm saying we found embedded in there something else. More, no religion, no God in the picture, just categories of the way we think. Okay? Day 2, set the whole thing, triggered it off, is differentiation. Day 1 is existence. Day 3 is space. Spatialization. Why? Because what was the picture? You had a water, and underneath the water down deep was a landmass. Okay? How do we see that from the text? Because it says Elohim pushed the water together. And if you look from the top view, like a draftsman, right? If you look from the top view, you would see the place where he pushed the water. So the water was in the middle, and the land was around it. That's what's a sea. It says a sea. What's the difference between a sea and an ocean? An ocean is the other way around. That it's land surrounded by water. Like an atoll in the Pacific. An atoll in the Caribbean. I mean, that's land surrounded by water. But here, it was water surrounded by land. So what we have then, number 3, you can't think without some kind of spatialization. You have to put things in space, relate to space, and so forth. Day 4, which people got stuck on because it presupposed the solar system, in this narrow context of thinking, there's no problem, because the text doesn't say about, it's not talking about creation, about where they came from. That's already, it's already in the first chapter. Light and daylight. I mean, you presuppose the solar system, blah, 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 blah. I'm not interested. But telling time by clock, and other ways, but by a clock, putting things in time is a category of thinking, like putting things in space. So we have existence, differentiation, space, and time. Well, we got 4 days. There's 6. What do? I got stuck.
You think there's 2 more things?
Well,
it has to be.
According to the symmetry and everything, I gave you I'm telling you the premise, I'm telling you what I did, and I'm giving you first 4 as categories of thinking. Okay? When it came to 5 and 6, I got stuck. And for 52 years...
Really?
Well, since I got stuck. For 52 years, it never left my head.
And you couldn't figure it out?
I couldn't figure it out. What is 5 and 6? If I'm going to follow this pattern through, namely, what category of thought is 5 and 6? Okay, what is the 5th day? 5th day says, we can do it in Ivrit, or we can do it in English, very few psukim, 3-4 psukim. And Elohim declared, let the waters bring forth the vermin-like and destructive things and so on, moving on the earth and flying in the air. Day 5 is the creation of non-domesticated animals. In the air, and on land, in the water.
All animals?
Animals. They're animate. They're different levels. They're shratzim, bugs, and different sizes and so on. But they're all self-movement. An animal differs from a plant in the sense that the plant grows, expands in space, but does not move by locomotion. In our usual understanding, an animate thing has locomotion in some sense. Whether it goes down to an amoeba and so on remains a big question for today. But the basic point is this. Okay, so here's the thing. Elohim declared that he created the very large-bodied creatures, innumerable marine monsters, and all that soul living things, animated with reptile-like movement, whose principles the waters brought forth in abundance after their kind, and so forth. And Elohim blessed these and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters of the seas. And then there was evening and morning on day 5. 4 or 5 psukim telling you what, again, in the old context, in the context that's there, is about who made it and what these things are, a classification for an agricultural society in terms of domesticated animals, which is day 6, is a very important thing. Because agriculture presupposes you domesticated the animals. So you can have chickens, donkeys, cows, and goats, and so on like that. Okay. So day 6 is domesticated animals plus the human being. That's day 6. But day 5 is the non-domesticated animals. Okay, so what? So I read it, and I said, okay, what does that mean? What do we get to a category of thought? Got any ideas?
I'm getting stuck on the domesticated versus non-domesticated, because it seems to me that day 5 is fish and birds.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and which means two things. Number one, chickens were created on day 5.
Okay.
Which are domesticated.
Okay.
And
that's a good point.
Also on day 6, you have land animals, which includes the non-domesticated.
Okay.
So I don't quite get the.
Yeah, I jumped the gun. That's why I jumped the gun. I should have gone step by step.
Okay.
Go step by step. In the story, they separate out the bird life from marine life in the 5th day, and then land life is on the 6th day plus the human being. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I jumped. That's what we have. Now the question is, given that material, how do we get a category of thought? That's what we need.
Category of 4.
A thought.
A thought.
How are we thinking? I mean, that's what we're looking for. We need a 5th and 6th category of thinking. Okay. So, never mind all the details of the discovery, which only happened in the last year. It dawned on me.
Your discovery.
Yeah, it dawned on me that these are signs of domesticated and non-domesticated animals. What do I mean? You have settlements where people live. When they domesticate animals in agriculture, the animals become part of that living space. But wild animals, the big creatures and so on, remain as a threat to the organized community. Because if snakes or animals or fish or birds flock, and so they could wipe out a settlement. So I got the crazy idea that we're talking about a category of thought called fearfulness.
Which?
Fearfulness. Being afraid. Being afraid. That's what day 5 is about. Namely, that's a category of thought triggered off by this interpretation of the domesticated and the non-domesticated animals. Well, we usually give examples of fearfulness by volcanoes and floods and all kinds of things. Like people who live, we had one in the paper last week, people who live near an active volcano all year round, they live with a mode of fearfulness. Okay? They live with a mode of fearfulness. And as it goes with other geographic things, characteristics, there's fearfulness. So I made the view and I said, okay, day 5 is the category called being afraid. But instead of limiting it to tsunamis and natural events, which we could fear, nature takes its own course and all of a sudden it wipes out a city. We have Inca in Peru, we have cities that are left over, nothing left from the civilization because something happened in the ecological dimension. So instead of sticking to things not made by the human being, made by nature, with a passion and a power that can knock out and kill like a plague and all these kinds of things. So I widened it up to include man-made things that we're afraid of. Eric J. Lifton in the 60s, 70s, whatever it was, I used to use his book in the class, he was a psychologist, and he talked about Hiroshima. After Japan, after the bomb, there was a category in psychology that was like a misplaced environment or misplaced earth. In other words, that was a fear, a tremendous fear that people suffer from. The end of the, we're gonna kill ourselves with the bomb and all this kind of stuff. And it was, as a psychologist, a working psychologist, he actually used it, and he had patients who he diagnosed with this kind of neurosis. Okay, in the thing. And b'mikra, last week, I happened to watch a serial documentary on Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor was in the Reagan administration, at that time, and that was the AIDS time.
Which?
AIDS. AIDS came in with a bang, so much so that the government was oblivious. It was economic, it was not a health issue, and the documentary showed that we almost went under. The country was full of fear about AIDS. And people were saying, look, it comes from sexuality and homosexuality. What the hell with them? We don't have to worry about that. The government should spend money on AIDS. I mean, it's an immoral thing, and all of this kind of stuff. And there's a whole rhetoric here and everything else. And she spent her whole life fighting and contributing her own money and everything to the campaign against AIDS. But what was depicted in the film, in this documentary, was, I was just going to talk last week, sorry, I was talking about fearfulness. Oh my God, what an example. And on a small scale, when they had the Intifada in Jerusalem of people getting on a bus and going up, everybody who lived in Jerusalem had a passing consciousness. Most people didn't say, look, I can't work, I have to lay in bed the whole day. That's the extreme case. We're not arguing for neurotic behaviors. But everybody, every person in the country
was scared.
So what I did was take fearfulness by nature, by something that's done by nature, and all the fearfulnesses that are done by man. And I included them on a scale. So terrorism, for example, is a kind of a fear.
Sure.
Okay? When you look and you start to think about the category, it covers everything. Because everything and anything, be it natural or human, is amenable to fear. And so I said fear, anxiety, tension. I just made the list a big continuum. And since I'm interested in sexuality because of the lifonic physics of how we get a handle on this, how we're going to deal with this. So I included a whole section in the write-up of the fear, the fearfulness that's involved in sexuality. Think back about children. Think back about yourself. Think back about people. The first time you meet a person of the opposite sex, there's tension, there's an anxiety, there's a whole, call it in this category now, fearfulness. So I widened up the category to include not only things by nature, a tsunami and so on that we're not involved in on the surface, we don't do much, but we can help. Sometimes delay it, sometimes not, but I included a full range of human fears. Now, you can say, you're crazy. Look how we got. I want a category of thought. I've given you a category of thought called fearfulness. Now you say, anybody thinking about it at first would say, look, you're stretching it. You can make your point about, domesticated, non-domesticated, as an example, and so on. But it's like David pointed out in terms of that, it's loose, it's not tight. And the whole idea, where does that come into the picture? Good. Did you take Poli-Sci 1? You take Poli-Sci 1?
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Well, you were a scientist, you never heard of it. Poli-Sci 1! Political Science 1. Who's Thomas Hobbes?
Who?
Hobbes. Hobbes was one of the founders of the social contract theory of government.
How do you spell his name?
Hobbes.
Oh,
Hobbes.
yeah.
Thomas Hobbes. And he wrote in the 1650s, whatever it was, and he wrote on the foundation of society, of civil society. Then it came Locke, John Locke, and then came Rousseau, and between Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau was set the societal foundations of living. And then on top of that became government and so on and so on. All the stuff that we come down with government and democracies and all this kind of stuff has its root in Hobbes, who was talking about democracy against the monarchy, in Machiavelli, you heard the name. These are the thinkers you take in political science 1. Of course, as a philosophy person, somebody once told me, they said, when I introduced Piaget, and I said, you know, we should teach Piaget as the philosophy first. Piaget is a very difficult psychologist. He has his own language, difficult language, and about the nature of the child, very important in education and so on. But the students don't understand him because he has the technical vocabulary. They don't understand things. So I said, look, you know, he wrote on philosophy. He considered himself not just a psychologist, but a philosopher. So let's give a course either at the same time or the first semester. Let's give a course in the philosophy department, or education department, where we're dealing Piaget's whole approach to life, to cognition, to biology, you know, and inside of that, as a beginning, a background, we'll be able to get and teach the more substantive psychological message of Piaget and what his whole thing. His basic thing, one of his basic things was, he didn't use numbers. Skinner, who was a big behaviorist, and in psychology, it built on the natural sciences of having numbers, repeatable experiment. If you can't repeat the experiment, this says something about your analysis. In science, repeatability is an important phenomenon, and social sciences took it over, repeatability, and when Piaget came on the scene, there were a few before him in Europe, but when Piaget came on the scene, he dealt with 5 kids. He was talking about the nature, the language of the child, the dreams of the child. There's his books over here. I have 50 books of Piaget. He was a child psychologist. I heard him once at NYU give a lecture, 3 lectures in French, and it was a great way. He spoke 5 minutes, that's it. 5 minutes, translation. 5 minutes, translation.
Oh, that's good.
So at least the audience, like myself, you didn't need earphones, you didn't need anything, that's it. They think it was on the story. So Piaget came on the scene and he said, here was Verbal Behavior by Skinner on the nature of language, a big thick book in behaviorism, stimulus response. Learning through stimulus response was the behaviorist thing. And it needed repeatability. And Piaget comes on the scene and has 4 or 5 children, age 3, age 4, age 5, and he's talking to the children, and he's doing things with the children, playing games and doing things, and writing up these things in a very personalistic way. Even the book, if you look in the book, take one of his books off the shelf, you'll see it says Cindy, age 2.5. And then he gives you the conversation and the... What? That's psychology? That's a science? That's a social science? That's like fiction. I mean, so when Piaget came on the scene, on the one hand, he said things that were very powerful, very insightful about the nature of the child. Okay? But on the other hand, he didn't have repeatability. So there was a battle in psychology that raged for 25 years between Piaget and the developmental psychology people, which had less repeatability, than behaviorism, which had maximum repeatability. Okay, so that was a machloket in methodology, and it ranged, and you can read it in the psychology books and so on. No, okay. But, come back to our point. Hobbes. If you took poli-sci 1, okay, you would know, and right away you would give me the answer. Hobbes said, the basis of society is the fear of a violent death. Hobbes' phrase. Hobbes, 17th century, Western civilization, takes fear, okay, Insecurity. Now you can expand it the way you want to expand it. Okay, I expanded it to the maximum. But in Hobbes, he was only concerned with the socio-personalistic structure of society. He was concerned with contract theory, with putting together contracts so that human beings can live together with a certain amount of civility and not fear for their lives. That was Hobbes' phrase. So when you now took your political science course, 101, I'm not so crazy. I'm telling you right there in the Chumash text, according to this understanding, in this subtext, the kind of thinking, the content of thinking is about fearfulness. And all the points that Hobbes makes that are related to society and contract are embedded in the meaning of fearfulness, as I put it down in day 5. And further, the content, the organization of the content of the Chumash, of the 5 books, where do we see anything that tells us what it's about? Is there an organizational principle or not? Well, day 5 is telling you that content-wise, the slices of experience, the slices of existence that are being presented and depicted in the text, especially in the narrative sections of the text, can be looked at, or should be looked at, from the point of view of where is the fearfulness in the situation. The assumption should be that what we have here is a way of entering the text, content-wise. We should look at a story and say, where is the fearfulness here? Fearfulness has to be in everything. There is no such thing without fear. That's the premise. So where is it? Oh, well, we'd say right away, first we'd look up, like I did, look up pachad, the Hebrew words for fear, ema, fear, and then we would say, oh, well, Yosef's brothers feared Yosef, that he would get even with them, and so on, and so on, and so on, and down the line, Esau, and the story. The Akedah story, in other words, Abraham would fear. He'd fear for himself because he'd have killed his son. He'd fear for Yitzchak because he'd have died. In other words, an entry, an organizational principle of what the text is talking about as a methodology to inquire into the text, into the stories, comes from this 5th day as a content point about fearfulness. There is nothing in the world without some kind of fearfulness. And there's a reaction to the fearfulness, and how it works, whether it gets worse, whether it gets better, and so on, so on, so on, so on. So, one of the values of this is that it gives you a point of entry into the text, which is content. So we could say the Chumash is about different slices of experience and existence that have in them different types of fearfulness, of insecurity, of anxiety, and it starts right off the bat with Chava. She'll have birth, but she'll have fearfulness, fear that the baby won't come out right, fear in her for herself, and you go down the line. I call them life health workables. But there's fearfulness that's now, I'm making the point that the fearfulness gives you a category not only of thought, but of actually entering into the text itself. The only other category we have for what the text is about is Ele Toldot. Ele Toldot is the phrase, these are usually translated generations. That's not quite correct. Toldot means developments. These are the things that happen. How do we know that? Because the first Toldot is Ele Toldot Shemayim V'aretz. Shemayim V'aretz have no progeny. We're not talking about progeny, about people, births, progeny. We're talking about the developments. So there were developments by Noach. It says in the Noach story, you have over there, and it'll tell you, Ele Toldot Noach. Toldot means the developments that happen, and then you have to enter into that, what it is. And it goes through the text, Ele Toldot Avraham, Ele Toldot Yitzchak, Ele Toldot Esav, Ele Toldot Yaakov, and so on and so on. And in Bamidbar, wherever, I think it's Bamidbar Shmo, it says Ele Toldot Moshe, Aaron v'Moshe. So that Aaron and Moses are included to sum up, or shall we say, the last of the Ele Toldots. That's all that exists in the Chumash. There are 6 or 7 of these Ele Toldot, which means these are the developments, the events, the things that happened. Now that's a content point. So inside the text we do have one indication of content point, of the thing they're going to talk about. They're talking about something to do with Moses, something to do with Aaron, something to do with Avraham, something to do with Yitzchak, but something to do with Esav, something to do with Yishmael. These are the figures that are giving us an entry into the text from the point of view of content. What's it talking about? It's talking about Esav's ploys and how is he related to Rivka and all the whole business. So that's all we have. I'm adding now, based on this analysis, another entry into the content, much more strict. In other words, not letting it go and go wherever it takes you, but actually saying, fearfulness is a fundamental category of thought. Where is the fearfulness in every single story? So therefore we're going to have a new material that we have missed because we didn't have the beginning point. If the person darshaning the Chumash, reading the text, is sensitive to fearfulness, or just going on like the week of the Blitz and the Intifada and so on, so his drasha for that week would relate to something fearful about the Parsha, but it's b'mikra, there's no plan. I'm saying we got now a plan which says you must enter the text by searching for the fearfulness and all the things that are surrounding it, how it was handled, what happened, and so on. And in the process, what will be yielded will be so many beautiful things in the text that we haven't touched. Except b'mikra, except if for one reason or another the person reading the text was concerned with fearfulness, insecurity, terrorism, blah 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 blah. So that gives it a certain meaningfulness. But I'm reading you the Hobbes thing, but that's Hobbes' words. Hobbes said fear of violent death. In other words, not death. People die. People live, they die. Okay. And there's accidents and so on and so on. But terrorism, right? Terrorism is on the end of a scale. And of course, as you see today, how modern we are. But the text is saying that there is this full range. Now, once you make it a full range like I did, oh God, you quadrupled the number of incidents, because now you included the sexuality, you included all the things. What you could say now, it says Yitzchak was fooling around in the field, making love, or whatever. Well, when you read it, it's one word. It's one word. You don't say anything. Well, the story is opening up and saying, well, there's so much to talk about sexuality here. Because we're now entering the text with fearfulness as a category of content in its fullness, not cutting it short, but widening it up. And so we will catch the dimension, shall we say, a content dimension of the stories, of the narratives that nobody picked up. Because nobody had, except the Mikra, because nobody had an entry. I'm having an entry that's coming from something inside the text. Day 5. Okay, that's the first point about.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
I can see your point about fearfulness. That's an understood condition that these societal developments try to avoid.
Sure, of course.
So it's right there in front of you, but they don't say it.
That's right. Yeah, okay, you're right.
But they're creating this world
in order
to minimize it.
Of course, but why shouldn't it be the case that when somebody studies Chumash, He's getting a picture of antiquity. The other piece of this story that I'm talking about now is the Chumash is an antiquarian text. The Chumash is not written here in 1900. The Chumash is not. The Chumash is part of an old culture, old set of culture, which has to be studied anthropologically. That's why I wrote it down. An anthropological in the text. What have we done? What have we done in the West? We had Greek philosophy, which is the gentleman's education. The Greek understanding of the world, of the scientific world, what he called scientific, the philosophical world, the metaphysical world, and so on and so on and so on. It took all of our great people 2,000 years to make the Chumash, which is an antique book, compatible with the Greek understanding of the world. That's what we have done. That's what Albo did, that's what Yudah Levi did, that's what the Rambam did, that's what all of our great people did. They took all this Greek material and they were able to incorporate it into a theological type metaphysics, which started from God as the creator and so on and so on and so on, and developed a coherent, relatively consistent understanding of the text. But what is that understanding? What's the understanding? The understanding is not coming from the text as an anthropologist. The understanding is coming from what we want. We want to make the text relevant. We want to make the text modern. If we can't make the text modern, then we have to go, we say we can't go back to an antiquarian society. But we also say we can't learn much from an antiquarian society. That has been shown in contemporary research and anthropology to be 100% false. Every single thing that when we went to school, Gene and I especially, when we went to school, they would say, not only that philosophy and civilization begins with the Greeks, with Homer, but that things done in antiquity was superstition, divination, all kinds of things, religion, God, everything was God, theology. Wow! The whole approach was geared to where we're coming from. We want to make the text over, and we succeeded in making the text over into a philosophical, metaphysical text. So if you'll ask somebody, what's the text about? He'll say, well, God is certainly in the text. God is related to the text, and so on and so on. Well, anthropology has shown, on examination of other cultures, the whole thing is backwards. The whole thing is backwards. Early civilization did not start with gods. God was a language for things that worked. In the antiquity world, all the anthropological research shows you, their concern is workables, things that have practical effect and work. That's the orientation, what we would call operational definitions. Namely, a thing is what it does. A person is what he does. A function is what it does. That's right in the text, in the third chapter of the story. The animals came before Adam. He was looking for Ezer Kenegdo, for somebody for a helpmate. And whatever Adam says the animal is what it is. And so in what we call modern terms, we could say operational. A thing is what it does, how it functions. So the how and how the thing is operating is built into the fabric of the society. For us, and for the Greeks, that's not the fundamental category of thinking. Thinking was not the how question, was not the operational definitions. Thinking was the what question. What is thinking? A being with a mind, a being with feelings. In other words, there was a whole pattern of thinking that was not built on operational definitions. So much so that in contemporary physics, when Bridgman came along, who was a philosopher and a physicist, and he wrote 6-7 books, and he said, oh, we have to look at physics from the point of science we're talking about. We have to look at science from the operational point of view. Well, that was a big chiddush, and he had a big fight with the whole thing. I started with Whitehead. Whitehead was close also to operational definitions. Pragmatic and operational are the two words for the kind of thinking that was going on in antiquity, in cultures before Moses, and definitely in Moses' culture. But for us, who have used the text as it's come down through the tradition, we've got to cut away all the stuff that we put on in 2,000 years to get at empirical things. For example, somebody discovered that Mount Sinai, when Moses got the tablets, and went up 40 days, 40 nights, an interesting thing, somebody showed that there was a section of the mount, one side, which had psychedelic mushroom. There's a mushroom that has psychedelic effects. Okay?
Which they ate, of course.
Wait. Yeah, psychedelic effects. So, one could say, look, Moshe Rabbeinu needed the concentration time. And when it says he didn't eat for 40 days and 40 nights, it didn't mean he didn't eat anything. It meant, perhaps, that he was on a mushroom diet to get the effect, the psychological effect of these things, the psychedelic effect. Now, at one time when we went to school, we'd say shtuyot, nonsense, divination, superstition, magic, or every single thing today, every single thing that we were told was superstition and magic and all kinds of things which you don't believe in. We have science and so on. Every single thing today is being researched in some part of a field. There's psychedelic research and its effects and so on. What are we talking about? These are empirical, or claim to be empirical. So when we are examining these things, we may not be doing science, but we're not doing shtuyot. We're not doing superstition. We are making inquiry to determine, now this is fake. Psychedelics do not give this and this and this and this. But they do give something. To go today and say, it's all nonsense. Nobody in his right mind today will say that. That's a total myth and a biased opinion that is not coming from reading the material. Go to your internet, plug in any one of these things, and you will see a group that's dealing with it. In my book, I dealt with it, the auras. I happen to be reading Barbara Brennan, who was a big world healer, and I analyzed, it's probably the first time somebody took us seriously as a philosophical, understanding, and I try to show the limits of the techniques. On the other hand, that there is something operative. It's not just nothing. You cannot say, well, I can't see the auras, it doesn't exist. When we learn more and more about the neurophysiology of the eye, I read a piece that had to do with the experiment. There's a split second, two second shift over of some kind in the eye, in normal vision, and in that slot one sees colors. In other words, when you read the material, and I certainly didn't read everything because it's just chock full, but I read enough of the material to see that everything that we labeled shtuyot, superstition, magic, and everything is today being part of research at different levels, all concerned with discovering the life system. That's where we are in the West in science. We have great success in physics, great success in mechanics, Newtonian physics and Newtonian optics and so on, and indeed, as things go, great success in relativity and in quantum. However, more and more physicists themselves and others are realizing that we are bankrupt when it comes to a life system. They do you a favor. There was a guy who won the Nobel Prize, I think his name was Schwartz, and in California they had once on the 75th anniversary for the university here at Hebrew University. This guy spoke, and he said, I'm going to give you what physics is going to look like in 20 years. Then he says, I hate to say it, but they did have a session on consciousness. They label it. It's physicists talking now. Physicists. They had an entry on consciousness. He says, I'm not in that. I'm in quantum physics and I'm in particle physics. I'm not really involved with all of this. However, there is a field called consciousness. In other words, that's where we are. We're looking, we don't know where it's going to come from. We don't know where we're going. We go into the Orient, because in the Orient they have things that work. Things that work, that are pragmatic and they're workable. We go to homeopathy, we go to different so-called fringe life sciences, because in the West we don't have any handle. So I was writing about what I called the liphonic physics, and showing, one of the things I showed was that there's something to this, to psychedelics and ESP and all the rest of the kind of stuff. However, none of it is enough to say we have a scientific picture of ESP and a scientific picture of auras. We don't. And the best we could get is a parallelism. In philosophy, we used to call it psychophysical parallelism. There was the mind and its operations and its things, and then there was corresponding to it brain states, neurological brain states, however you determine them. So you correlated when the person was thinking about an emotion or feeling something or feeling a drive or whatever it happened to be. In that, they measured, at that moment, they measured the electrocardiograph material, and they got a correlation between neurology, physiology, and psychology of the mind. That's as much as and the best that we got in the West. We've got some insights, whetting the appetite, but that is not science. To have a set of correlations between one domain and another domain is not science. So the people that are more speculative, that are more in antiquity, they're looking for a different explanation. They want an explanation of the mind-body problem, of how these things correlate. Not that they correlate. That they correlate, we have. How they correlate, what's going on? Where do we have explanation? We don't have explanation. So, on the one hand, I showed we can't say it's all nonsense, but on the other hand, I showed by a careful analysis of the aura system that it's not rich enough in physics to say, oh, we have a liphonic physics of the life system. We just got the tip of the iceberg. So what I'm saying, a side dimension of this whole business that I found a story embedded in the story content-wise, is that some of the material that we will now search for in the new understanding of the Chumash text will be relevant to advancing step by step, little by little, a life science. That's at the level of quantum, level of relativity. Nobody has proven that that's impossible, that the human being cannot conceptualize himself in a scientific way. Nobody's shown that's impossible, conceptually impossible. As long as nobody has shown that it's conceptually impossible, people like myself and others who are working to try to put out in the public the realization that this science is not crossing the T's and dotting the I's. That's what Boltzmann, the theory of gases at the end of the 19th century, when Planck came on, before Planck came on the scene in 1900, so Boltzmann was not exactly a college professor. Boltzmann's theory of gases was a big guy, and Gene will tell you. I mean, Boltzmann was a big guy. And so Planck said, well, we have to wait till the old people die and have a new generation that will be nurtured on quantum in relativity, and 1905 Einstein papers, 1905 was the relativity papers. So here we are. I mean, here we are in the whole orientation. So as a side effect, as a side value, in one of the other books, I developed some of these things that are both in the antiquity, in the material, and have value for speculation. I call it intuition. Intuitions about a life system. And I wrote this book, that you have there. I wrote this book about intuitions and speculations about a life system. And I made some crazy, crazy speculations on the hope, as I told the reader, that a mathematician may read the book and it may trigger off a new mathematics that's amenable to the life system. I'm high on mathematics. That a physics that mean a high-level science requires a special type of mathematization that generates what has to be observed. Then we look for the observation and the measurement and the experiment. But we need theoretical. There was at one time theoretical physics, experimental physics. And theoretical physics has been out of vogue because the unified field has been left. Einstein left it, no solution, still open. And people are going into geophysics, the sun, flares, chemistry, and all the stuff that's so exciting in space program and all the rest of the stuff. But there was, at one time, such a thing called theoretical physics. They even talked about theoretical entities in philosophy of science, that a particle, an electron, is not a thing. It's something else. It's metaphysics and difficult and so on. And the question was, how could it be, they say, Joe Levinson, how could it be that mathematics, which is the furthest thing from nature, it's part of the human being. The human being discovered, constructed geometry. It wasn't there. How could it be that mathematics, geometry, number theory, and so on, trigonometry, and topology, and all the rest, how could it be that something the human being constructed is the key to understand the thing that the human being did construct, which is the universe? That problem is left open. Nobody has an answer to that problem. But the fact is, if you're a big mathematization person, not everybody who is a physicist takes this view. Most people today are empiricists and stress the empirical dimension, what we call experimental physics, not theoretical physics. But there are some, Feynman was one of them, is a big physicist. Feynman was one of them, I used to teach him in my philosophy science class, and a few others, who did stand by the mathematization and its significance. And so yours truly, crazy, not a mathematician, not a physicist, a mere philosopher, making speculations of saying, you know, it can't be geometry. The mathematization for a life system cannot be geometry. That's good for particles, that's good for quantum, micro and macro world, and certainly was good for Newtonian physics, which is built on Euclidean geometry. Geometry cannot be the mathematization. It has to be number theory. When I spoke to my friend across the street, mathematician, and I said, you know, I'm going on a limb, but one of the things I wrote was about number theory. So he says, until recently, number theory was the pride of the mathematicians who said, there ain't no applications. Number theory was pure mathematics with no applications. Recently there's been some applications in codification and codes and things like that. So there is a little bit of a breakthrough in the application of number theory. But I came along and I said, it cannot, my intuition says, a mathematization cannot be geometry. Meaning, it cannot be topology. That's where everybody is today. Topology. Topology in 2 dimension, and topology in 3 dimension, which is very complicated, they tell me. Very complicated picture when you go up in 1 dimension. But I didn't even go there. I said, topology? That's a species of geometry. My intuition says it's number theory. But I haven't got the foggiest idea what we're talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not a mathematician. I don't know enough. I wrote 2 lines about number theory, about the conjecture. And so, okay, I wrote a few things, but this is intuition talking. And I told the reader, intuition by a philosopher can be very, very right or very, very wrong. And for me, we need a revolution in mathematics per se, and specifically in number theory. We need a revolution on the scale of Euclidean, non-Euclidean geometry that was in Poincaré and finally got formulated in Riemann and company, and went into the Einstein picture. In Poincaré we have the mathematization earlier than Einstein. So I said, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm blowing steam through the hat. But maybe a mathematician will read the book. And I said, if he gets this far with all the shtuyot that's in it, intuitions, he may see, it may trigger something. And he may be the Lobachevsky of the New World. Now, you could say, look, you don't need mathematization. Oh, that's something else. There are people, most of the people in philosophy of science say, this is a pseudo question, you don't need mathematization. There's mathematization that it functions to aid and to work in observation, in measurement. There's measurement theories, there are mathematicians in the field of measurement. So there are a lot of domains of mathematics which function inside the science in the sense of aids to formulate the experimental side of the science. But what I'm talking about is representing the field, representing what we're talking about, in this case the life system, life energy, whatever you want to call it, by a mathematization like we represent the sun by a circle. And for certain purposes we deal with the circle, and the circle can predict certain kinds of things that we must look for. Then we look for the empirical side. But most people have Mavatal taken out of the picture of the mathematization, and I myself am not. I get bogged down in a number of interesting questions, which it's beyond me. I don't know enough to go further to the end and talk about mathematization. So it's hard to talk about something that you don't know what you're talking about, and that you're making a projection that you also don't know what you're talking about. So just to finish up the point, the basic point is that in Western civilization, there's this category that I put fearfulness. When you put now political science 1 in the picture, it's not so crazy. What I did is not so crazy. The expansion is worked out, but it's not so crazy. And to end for tonight, without further example, just one other example and one other point, quick. One of the things that we will discover in the 5 books of Moses, practices, workables of things that worked before his time, that came down as cross-cultural things, workables at the culture, and there was 10,000 years of agricultural revolution. There were all kinds of things going on. There were all kinds of speculations about how self-consciousness grew. It wasn't there from the early beginning. It grew in the agricultural revolution, and blah 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 blah, the whole story. So there's an entry into the text that is very, very important and has caused total confusion of the text. What is it? It is the use, and you heard me a million times, the primary use in the society of performative language. Performative language means let there be. Let there be marriage. Let there be bride. Let there be hegdesh. Let there be is a use of language which is not assertion. It doesn't say this is X. Assertion language is true or false. Performatives take the form of let my name be Joe. It's not true, it's not false. It's there. And once you name me, or once you name the ship, the Queen Elizabeth or the Queen Mary, it's not finished until it's named, but the naming doesn't add anything to the ship. It's not another bolt. It's not a piece of metal. It's the name of the thing. It's not finished until it has a name. The concept of name is a performative utterance. It is not an assertion. So, what's been missed in the text is the total use of the primacy of performative language, and it says there right off the bat, Vayehi or, first day, Vayehi or, Yehi or. Vayehi is a classical format of a performative utterance. Yehi. Yehi or, Vayehi or. Two, 4 words. In those 2 lines, we have been translating the text. God said. God didn't say. God declared. To declare is to say, I declare. To declare is to say, I declare. To announce is to say I announce. To pray is to say I pray. And then you give the content of the prayer. In other words, there's a use of language which is not true or false. It's not assertive language. It's performative language. And what I discovered is that in the Chumash world, the primary language is performative, not assertion. But we, in the Greeks, the primary language was assertion, was true or false. And so, from the translation on, from the Septuagint on, the translation into Greek, look at the translation and you see the first word is theos, God. The grammatical structure of the language is true or false. But the text, the fundamental language of the text is performative. So one of the things that we have to do, in addition to the content that I talked about in terms of fearfulness, is re-look at those statements of Vayomer. Vayomer Moshe, Vayomer Elohim, Vayomer Hashem, and so on, so on, so on. Vayikra, he called, and so on. And have a more careful translation of what the text is saying. The text says to declare. It means it's efficacious, it has value, it's worth, but it has nothing to do with truth or falsity. To declare is to posit, to say, I take it as such. In thought, in machshava, in philosophy, for example, one of the big breakthroughs in contemporary understanding of philosophy, of metaphysics, is that it has in it, I posit. Descartes, who started contemporary philosophy, said, I think, therefore I am. So everybody took it, yours including. When I taught Descartes, I taught 17th century philosophy. I would have a total different course today. The analysis is that this is performative language. It's not an assertion. So I've been looking for the truth of Descartes' point. I think, therefore I am. So it's put in a structure of a syllogism, like a formulation, which is asking the question, begging for an answer. How is it true? And all we got was in the pineal gland. Descartes was no slouch, no college professor, father of analytic geometry. Descartes says, well, I have to have a God in the picture to do this, to connect the mind and the body. And in the pineal gland, there's something that does the job. Well, whenever I taught it, students laughed. That's no explanation. No explanation. But that's where we are. That's where we are. So the whole idea of positing means you don't have to justify it. You take it as a given. You don't have to argue for it. You can use it. You have to use it. A performative you use, it has value, but it's not true or false. Now take it in relation to prayer, in relation to religious things. Yours truly spent a whole lifetime in philosophy searching for the existence of God and found nothing. There were no proofs for the existence of God. So I came along and said, well, how can it be a Torah system without God? Well, I hate to surprise everybody, there is a Torah system without God. Now, that's from the negative. To work all of that out is the work, part of the work, of the reconceptualization of Torah and Yahadut for the 21st century. If we're going to have a Sanhedrin, in addition to working on practical things, we're going to have to develop a think tank so that the young people, just like Planck said, the old people, they're not going to come out of the woodwork. I sent the early books to 10 biblical scholars, never got an answer. They're not coming out of the woodwork. They have to die off. When they die off, the young people who are searching and coming in with different packages of knowledge than I had or that you had, will move things along and hopefully reconceptualize the halachic system and the Torah system, and especially the text. We're not making the text modern, we're taking away the philosophy part. Philosophy was in its heyday for 2,000 years. And to end the story on a positive note, this point about the language declared, fundamentally we have to change the translation. It means God declared. It's not said, not true or false. God declared, and we have to find all of those in the text. And so, before I came Aliyah, so one of the great Gaonim, the Halacha, said something that also nobody would say today in the rabbinic world. The Rambam is good until Descartes. What did he mean? He meant that to learn a Blat Gemara, you need a Rambam. You don't study a Blat Gemara from the text, you study it from a machloket and a question raised by the Rambam. You study the text, and then you study the Rambam, and you get all the Meforshim, and then you go to the page in the Gemara. But you work on the Rambam. But when it comes to the understanding of the universe, Rambam is all finished. It's after Newton. It's after Newton and Descartes. He used the word Descartes. Okay, but we use the word Newton. Newton was the beginning of the New World. And the Vilna Gaon said, all the Kabbalah of the Ari, which is 1550, 100 years before Newton, all of the Kabbalah Ari, which has in it many of the points that will be discovered, and I discovered, and others discovered, in the text as vestiges of these kinds of workables, that things that work. They're in the Kabbalah as well. And so these I forgot what I want to say. These workables were, so these workables were there, worked. But when it says that when it comes only until Descartes, the Gaon meant until the scientific revolution. The Gaon is after Newton. And he said that all of the Kabbalat Ari is a mashal. Why? Because it's in metaphysics. If you read the Eitz HaChaim and you read the Kabbalistic books, it's all in metaphysics. I read them. I studied them. I did 13 years work on the Ari every week, a shir, with a real Mekubal, not from the university world. And I learned, at least one thing I learned, when you go through the whole text and all the rest of the material, it's all metaphysics. The contraction, the beginning, and so on, it's all metaphysics. We need a scientific approach, not a metaphysical approach. And so it's all in the so what did the Gaon mean? It took me a long time to figure out what was said. But what I think he meant was that until the human being sees the power, the conceptual power and the technological power of Newtonian physics, that has to do with, relatively speaking, the low order of physics, when we get a science of the mind, a science of feelings, a science of the human being, what I call the life system, until we have an experience of that and we know something about that in the low order of the Bria, we haven't got the foggiest idea of what will be when we finally get to discovery. Medicine will never look the same, and we'll look at where we are today as the Dark Ages. Okay? Good. Some other time we'll talk about day 6. Just to tell you, I coined the term usability. Day 6 is usability. And some other time we'll talk about how usability is another category, and the fundamental category. I first thought life, life is too loose here. Life is inside the human being's use of himself, the human being's use of others, the human being's use of things that he made, the human being's use, and when you start to put the categories on, you see it's a whole universe. So just as there's a universe, a comprehensive universe of topics in the book, day 5, there's another set of topics rooted in day 6. I call it a revolution. Nobody caught it. Nobody caught it. It's in the text. You can now study the text and look and see if it makes sense, even with David's criticism and everything, with the looseness of it there. Nevertheless, fearfulness is a category of the Chumash world. Clock. Putting things in time is a category of thinking, like putting things in space. So we have existence, differentiation, space, and time. Well, we got 4 days. There's 6. What do we do? I got stuck.
You think there's 2 more things?
Well,
It has to be.
according to the symmetry and everything, I'm telling you the premise, I'm telling you what I did, and I'm giving you first 4 as categories of thinking. Okay? When it came to 5 and 6, I got stuck. And for 52 years,
Really?
well, since I got stuck, for 52 years, it never left my head.
And you couldn't figure it out.
I couldn't figure it out. What is 5 and 6? If I'm going to follow this pattern through, namely, what category of thought is 5 and 6? Okay, what is the 5th day? 5th day says, we can do it in Ivrit, or we can do it in English, very few psukim, 3-4 psukim. And Elohim declared, let the waters bring forth the vermin-like and destructive things and so on, moving on the earth and flying in the air. Day 5 is the creation of non-domesticated animals. In the air, and on land, in the water.
All animals?
Animals. They're animate. They're different levels. They're shratzim, bugs, and different sizes and so on. But they're all self-movement. An animal differs from a plant in the sense that the plant grows, expands in space, but does not move by locomotion. In our usual understanding, an animate thing has locomotion in some sense. Whether it goes down to an amoeba and so on. Right. So there's something there. That's what I mean. We're talking about categories of thinking, not with respect to a creator. That's in the first story. In the first story, yes, things were made by HaKadosh Baruch Hu as part of that story. So now we're switching, and I'm saying we found embedded in there something else. More, no religion, no God in the picture, just categories of the way we think. Okay? Day 2 set the whole thing, triggered it off, is differentiation. Day 1 is existence. Day 3 is space. Spatialization. Why? Because what was the picture? You had a water, and underneath the water down deep was a landmass. Okay? How do we see that from the text? Because it says Elohim pushed the water together, and if you look from the top view, like a draftsman, right? If you look from the top view, you would see the place where he pushed the water. So the water was in the middle, and the land was around it. That's what's a sea. It says a sea. What's the difference between a sea and an ocean? An ocean is the other way around. That it's land surrounded by water. Like an atoll in the Pacific, an atoll in the Caribbean. I mean, that's land surrounded by water. But here, it was water surrounded by land. So what we have then, number 3, you can't think without some kind of spatialization. You have to put things in space, relate to space, and so forth. Day 4, which people got stuck on because it presupposed the solar system, in this narrow context of thinking, there's no problem, because the text doesn't say it's not talking about creation, about where they came from. It's already in the first chapter. Light and daylight. I mean, you presuppose the solar system, blah, 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 blah. I'm not interested. But telling time by clock and other ways, but by a common remains a big question for today. But the basic point is this. Okay, so here's the thing. Elohim declared that he created the very large-bodied creatures, innumerable marine monsters, and all that soul living things, animated with reptile-like movement, whose principles the waters brought forth in abundance after their kinds, and so forth. And Elohim blessed these and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters of the seas. And then there was evening and morning on day 5. 4 or 5 psukim telling you what, again, in the old context, in the context that's there, is about who made it and what these things are, a classification for an agricultural society in terms of domesticated animals, which is day 6, is a very important thing, because agriculture presupposes you domesticated the animals, so you can have chickens, donkeys, cows, and goats, and so on like that. Okay. So day 6 is domesticated animals plus the human being. That's day 6. But day 5 is the non-domesticated animals. Okay, so what? So I read it, and I said, okay, what does that mean? What do we get to a category of thought? Got any ideas?
I'm getting stuck on the domesticated versus non-domesticated, because it seems to me that day 5 is fish and birds.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Okay.
and which means 2 things. Number one, chickens were created on day 5.
Okay.
Which are domesticated.
Okay.
And
that's a good point.
Also on day 6, you have land animals, which includes the non-domesticated.
Okay,
so I don't quite get the.
Yeah, I jumped the gun. That's why I jumped the gun. I should have gone step by step.
Okay.
Go step by step. You had to say, what am I talking about? I'm talking about Riemannian non-Euclidean geometry. Has something to do with the parallel postulate, blah, 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 whatever it is. And in discussions about geometry, you can go to the library and see you can turn it off, David. Press so you could see the changes in the way we talked about geometry. So
Okay.
so coming back, so the basic point was, here we have differentiation, and I got this crazy idea at the time that maybe embedded in the creation story concerned with the things that we didn't do is another story or another piece inside the text that has to do not with the things that we didn't make as a creation story, but with how Moshe and the period of his time thought about the things. I got this crazy idea that there was inside of the big story another story. And the other story, the content of was it differentiation. Then I said light. Light means existence, because you can't see in the dark. You have to see. Like when a child when you take the light out, we take it as a nothing, but that's a big crisis for a child, as you know. The child has to learn that nothing changes, so we give him a doll. We allow the child to sleep with something that keeps the room in balance with all of its components, even though it's in the dark. So I said, oh, well, okay, differentiation. Day 2. Day 1, existence. There has to be something that exists. That is, I call it a thing. There has to be something that is going to talk about. So we have a category, existence. There's no thinking without existence. Something has to be the subject of what we're talking about.
When you say existence, you mean creation of thing?
Now I'm not talking about creation. I'm just saying categories. I'm now depicting.
Well, if there's nothing there, you can't count.
Okay, a little over 50 years ago. Time flies. A little over 50 years ago. In studying the Chumash, the first chapter of the Chumash, I got hung up, very enthralled with differentiation, the Hevdel, to separate out the day from the night. They use the word the Hevdel in the first, about the creation of light, and about the Mayim on top and so on. Okay, I'm not concerned with to explain the Bria and the creation story as most people understand it, and as it's come down, as a story about the things that we didn't make. Did not make. These things that are in the story are not made by the human being. including the human being. It's not made by the human being, but the human being can use all the things that are made, but not by the human being. Okay, so I got enthralled with this idea of Heidegger. And what hit me at the time was differentiation. Differentiation is a property of thinking. You cannot think without differentiation. In Greeks, it was the same in the other. Plato discusses it, all the philosophers discuss it. You can't think without differentiation. Differentiation requires two. You can't think one. If you have one, you cannot think. I even used it as extended to the idea when I talked about non-Euclidean geometry. Before 1830, geometry meant Euclid. After the word geometry, space,
Really meant
Euclid because that was the only geometry.
That's called plane geometry.
Right.
Yeah.
After Lobachevsky and Riemann, 1830, 1840, when you said the word geometry, at a certain point,